break from usual pattern a little bit, I'd like to offer some preliminary thoughts before I read the reading itself. Back in the day, as people of a certain age like to say, our local supermarket would offer customers the opportunity to buy sets of reference books, one volume at a time. Some of you may remember that. One set of books that came into our family that way was called The American Heritage New Illustrated History of the United States, in 16 volumes. Maybe because they came out when I was an early reader, I don't remember reading those volumes so much as I remember poring over the illustrations in them. And I think that it was in those pages that I was first introduced to a collection of portraits of George Washington, painted by various artists at different times in his life. In our time, of course, digital photography rules the day. It has its own kind of artistry. But there's something about those old hand-painted portraits that our newer technologies don't seem to be able to capture. That something might be hard to define. But it has to do with things like the artist's attention to the subject's poses, or their clothing, or sometimes it's a painting's background that draws us into the artist's world. But most of all, that special something is an artist's gifts of capturing a certain perspective on their subject's personality or character. Part of the richness of our Christian heritage is that our scriptures don't give us one portrait of Jesus, but four. At times, this can pose some challenges. But having these four, each one seeing Jesus through a different set of lenses, offers us a richness and depth that no single portrait of Jesus could ever capture. We can see this in the two versions the Bible gives us of Jesus' central teaching. We call Matthew's version of this, the one that we probably know the best, the Sermon on the Mount. Luke's version, which we'll be reading a portion of today, and is the purpose of all of this ramble, we often call the Sermon on the Plain. The two cover much of the same ground, but each of them frames Jesus' teaching in its own way. In this section that we're reading today, Luke has pulled together several of Jesus' sayings about love in a particularly compelling way. So, reading now from the 6th chapter of Luke, beginning at verse 27. Jesus says, "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There's an awful lot in these few verses. For the sake of brevity as much as anything, I'd like to highlight 3 aspects of Jesus' teaching here about love. I've decided to call this message Loving Like Jesus, because this is not only what Jesus taught, it's also the way he lived and died. This is the point in the sermon where the preacher should give you some clever scheme to remember these 3 points by. I don't happen to have that clever scheme today. In fact, the one I do have is kind of clunky. They do all, however, at least begin the same way. Those 3 aspects of loving the way Jesus loves are, first, non-retaliation, second, non-reciprocity, and third, non-judgment. So the first of these 3 nons is non-retaliation. Jesus launches into this whole thing with what seems like the hardest case. He says, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. It seems to be almost instinctive for us humans to want to strike back when someone harms us. And it's built into many of our ideas about justice. In Matthew's version of this saying, Jesus reminds his hearers that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is even enshrined in the law of Moses. But what happens when we fall into cycles of harm and retaliation? Is justice ever really achieved that way? Very much on our minds these days are the atrocities committed against the people of Israel on October 7th, 2023 by members of Hamas. There is no way to justify those abominable acts. But has Israel's retaliation against the people living in Gaza, multiplying the death and destruction, accomplished anything? Or has it just fanned the flames of hatred and escalated the level of violence? It must be said that this principle of non-retaliation should not be abused to require a person to remain in an abusive situation or to forbid a person in danger from seeking safety. Jesus' emphasis here is on how we act toward those we would call enemies. He simply says that we are to love them. And he describes that as doing good to those who hate us, blessing those who curse us, praying for those who abuse us. If we need more guidance about what this might look like, we might remember 1 Corinthians 13. Translated into this context, Jesus says that we should treat those who seek to do us harm with patience and kindness. Or as Paul teaches in Romans 12, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. We can't control how other people regard us or how they treat us. But Jesus calls us to love as he does. To quote from Peter's first letter, when he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. Even on the cross, when Jesus might have called down the wrath of God on those who were bent on shaming him and subjecting him to inhuman pain and killing him, he prayed instead, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. The second aspect of loving like Jesus is non-reciprocity. Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And a bit later he adds, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. To love like Jesus is to love expecting nothing back. In his classic book, Celebration of Discipline, Richard Foster wrote about the difference between what he called self-righteous service and true service. Listen to some of what he says about the difference between the two. He says, self-righteous service requires external rewards. It needs to know that people see and appreciate the effort. It seeks human applause with proper religious modesty, of course. True service rests contented in hiddenness. It does not fear the lights and the blare of attention, but it does not seek them either. Self-righteous service is highly concerned about results. It eagerly awaits to see if the person served will reciprocate in kind. It becomes bitter when the results fall below expectations. True service is free from the need to calculate results. It delights only in the service. Foster teaches that one way to grow a heart that's free to love as Jesus does is to consciously practice a spiritual discipline of performing anonymous acts of service. It's obviously not possible to do that all the time. But if we develop the desire to serve when literally no one is looking, it will help the character of Jesus grow within us. The third of these three nons is non-judgment. Jesus says, do not judge and you will not be judged. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. We see this in Jesus' way of life, in the way he welcomed all, and in his practice of what I like to call him being an equal opportunity dinner guest. Jesus would more or less eat dinner with anybody who invited him. And that meant he shared meals with social outcasts, the people the Pharisees called sinners. And he shared meals in the homes of Pharisees, too. Our tendency to judge often gets in the way of our ability to love and to give without expecting anything in return. As a pastor, I was confronted with this most often on those occasions when a beat-up old car would pull into a church parking lot and a raggedy dressed person would come to the door claiming a desperate need. Reverend Candace, smiling back there. Been there too. These are difficult situations because experience teaches that these folks come in basically two varieties. There are those who are absolutely desperate and who are visibly embarrassed to be standing there. And then there are those who are the regulars. In one place where I served, there was a woman who I interacted with on and off for almost 2 decades. She was well known around the area. Once I saw her name in the paper when she was arrested and jailed for welfare fraud. And I read the letters to the editor she wrote from the county jail. She called me not only at church at all hours, but also at home. And often enough she called that Lori even recognized her voice. It could be tempting to judge her and to send her away empty-handed. But I also knew that she had young children. And I could never feel quite right about just kicking her to the curb. There was no way I could tell on any given occasion if she was telling me the truth, or whether she was just out making the rounds to see how much cash she could collect, or if she really did need food or medicine or gas that day. Over time, I more or less tried to play it by ear. I would try to give her the things she needed rather than cash. I filled her gas tank on more than one occasion, and once I even gave her an extra microwave oven that was sitting in the church kitchen. Eventually, I put her on a budget of sorts. And there were times when I just said no, and then wondered what Jesus would have done. Following Jesus' teaching about love can put us in complicated situations. It can leave us open to being taken advantage of. But when we talk about non-retaliation, non-reciprocity, non-judgment, when we talk about serving without judging, giving without expecting anything in return, or loving our enemies, we're really just talking about walking in the steps of Jesus. He healed, whether the crowds adored him or whether the Pharisees railed against him. He stayed on message, both on Palm Sunday and on Good Friday. And today, he invites us into the freedom and contentment that comes with loving others, just as he has loved us. Thanks be to God. Amen.